I worked at a museum housed in an old building downtown with a storied past. Once a vaudeville theatre, it later served as a used car lot before falling into disrepair. When it was finally bought and remodeled into a museum, strange things began happening. I'm a staunch skeptic, but some occurrences were impossible to dismiss. After closing the museum for the night, we'd be in the lobby, counting cash, closing the gift shop, and tidying up. Often, we'd hear the unmistakable sound of running footsteps on the floor above, even though we knew no one was up there. The next morning, upon reopening, we'd find exhibits disrupted, clothes scattered, items knocked over, and doors ajar. I was the one who locked up, so I knew these things weren't like that the night before. The place had an unsettling aura. There were times when an inexplicable unease would settle over you, for no apparent reason. The elevator was especially eerie. It frequently moved between floors on its own, which could have been due to electrical issues, but it added to the creepy atmosphere, especially when it moved in the dark, with the persistent ding-ding echoing through the empty halls. The most disturbing event, however, occurred one evening when I was with a colleague. We were standing on the second floor landing, facing the stairs that led up to the third floor. The museum was closed, and no visitors should have been present. As we were chatting, a little boy in a red shirt suddenly appeared, running around the corner by the elevator and darting up the stairs to the third floor. We both saw him clearly. Our immediate reaction was to question if we had missed a late visitor. It wasn't a large building, and it had been at least 30 minutes since we had locked the doors. There was only one way up to the third floor and one way down, so if someone had been there, we surely would have seen them. We climbed the stairs to check, but the third floor was empty. From then on, whenever something strange happened, we'd shrug and say, "It must have been the boy in the red shirt." The name stuck, and whenever the oddities began to escalate, we'd joke about him being behind it all. But deep down, we all knew there was something unsettling about that boy in the red shirt, something that couldn't easily be explained away. I once worked third shift at a home for the developmentally disabled. Our state hospital had shut down, leaving many families with nowhere to place their loved ones, who needed more care than they could provide. In response, a parent founded and built a series of homes for this population, creating a successful option for these families and their loved ones. The homes were structured with 4 bedrooms, a bathroom, laundry room, and kitchen on both sides, connected by an enormous pantry. Each side had a front door, parking lot, and a sliding glass door leading to a patio and a generous fenced-in backyard. Each night, one person was assigned to each side of the home. When we arrived for the night shift, the residents were usually already asleep. Our job was to check on them at intervals and prepare meals and other tasks for the first shift. One particular night, I was working opposite a guy I'd just met. He seemed great, and I felt comfortable with him right away. I was in the kitchen after making food for the next day, cleaning out the fridge of food that was over 3 days old, when I got the intense feeling of being watched from behind. I turned toward the scallop window in the door and saw the face of a young girl who was clearly developmentally disabled. She wasn't one of our residents. She looked distraught, and as I moved toward her, making eye contact, she vanished. There one moment, then just gone. Understandably freaked out, I went through the pantry to the opposite side of the house to tell my coworker what had just happened. As I described the girl in great detail, his face went white. He ran off to another room and came back with a photo album. He opened it to a certain page and laid it on the counter. There she was, the girl. I said, "Oh my God, that's her," and pointed to her face in the picture. His reaction was instant. He freaked out and insisted we do everything together for the rest of the night. He explained that I had just pointed to a former resident who had died in the parking lot. She had an emergency and an ambulance had been called, but she passed away before they even made it out of the parking lot. My blood ran cold. I always tried to find reasonable explanations for things like this, but that night there was none. We stuck together for the remainder of the shift, haunted by the memory of that girl's face. But that wasn't the end of it. The following nights, strange things began to happen. We heard whispers in the hallways, footsteps echoing in the empty rooms, and once the pantry door slammed shut on its own. Residents who were usually calm began to have night terrors, screaming about a girl standing at the foot of their beds. One night, as we did our rounds together, we saw her again. She stood in the backyard, staring through the sliding glass door, her eyes wide and mournful. My co-worker and I stood frozen, watching as she pressed her hands against the glass. Then, just as before, she vanished. We reported everything to our supervisor, but they dismissed our concerns, attributing them to stress and overwork. But we knew better. The girl was trying to tell us something, her presence growing stronger with each passing night. On what would be my last shift at the home, we found a hidden journal in the pantry, tucked behind a loose panel. It belonged to the girl. In it, she wrote about her fears and her longing to go home. She wrote about feeling trapped and forgotten. That night, as we read her words, we felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, and the lights flickered. The girl appeared once more, standing in the doorway. This time, she seemed peaceful. She smiled at us, a look of gratitude in her eyes, before fading away. After that night, the disturbances stopped. The home returned to its quiet routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, watching over the place she had once called home. I left the job soon after, but the memory of her haunted eyes and the eerie events of those nights stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. My grandma was in a care home for the last few years of her life, struggling with mild dementia. One day, the staff called us, saying she'd been taken to the hospital because she was very upset about a dead baby in her room. They suspected she might be hallucinating due to a urine infection. My uncle and I rushed to the hospital, expecting the usual confusion and distress. But what we encountered was far from ordinary. Grandma, her eyes wide and wild, told us a little girl had spent a day with her. As she described the girl singing for her mammy in a chilling sing-song voice, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. She imitated the voice, a ghostly echo that seemed to linger in the sterile hospital room. Grandma also mentioned giving the girl some chocolate. Late that night, we accompanied her back to the care home. The place felt different, shadows creeping in the corners and an unsettling stillness in the air. When we opened the door to her room, the sight that greeted us froze my blood. Unwrapped chocolates scattered on the floor next to her chair, just as she had described. We picked up the chocolates, feeling an icy dread. The older staff dismissed our concerns with practiced indifference, but a young member of staff pulled me aside, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "I'm not sure if I should tell you this," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "But it's a bit spooky." My heart raced as I urged her to continue. "The lady who had your grandma's room before was moved because she kept talking about a dead baby too. And late at night, we hear children running and playing in the halls. This building used to be a mother and baby home in the 1940s. Her words sank into my bones. bringing a cold, creeping terror. I thanked her and returned to my grandma's room, the feeling of being watched pressing in on me. I sat beside her, listening to the silence, now filled with the weight of unseen eyes and unheard whispers. Over the next few days, the sense of dread grew. Grandma often spoke of the little girl, her sweet visitor. One night, as she dozed off, I heard it, the faint sound of a child's laughter, followed by the soft patter of tiny feet. I stood frozen, heart pounding, as the noises grew louder, then abruptly stopped. Grandma's condition worsened, and the little girl's visits became more frequent. Each time, Grandma would describe her in detail: the singing, the chocolate. The care home felt like a labyrinth of fear, every corner hiding unseen horrors. The night Grandma died, I stayed by her side, my hand clutching hers. In her final moments, she whispered, "She's here, singing for her mammy. She's so happy now." A chill ran through me, and I felt an icy breath on my neck. After her funeral, I visited the care home one last time. Her room was empty, but the air was thick with a malevolent presence. As I stood there, I heard the faintest whisper, a child's voice singing a haunting lullaby. I turned and left, but the terror stayed with me. The care home, once a place of care and rest, was now a haunted prison for lost souls. Grandma's final days were filled with something far more sinister than dementia, a ghostly visitor with a chilling song and an insatiable hunger for chocolate. Even now, when I think of Grandma, I remember that eerie voice and the chocolates on the floor. The dead don't rest easily in that place, and the little girl still roams the halls, searching for her mummy and anyone else who will listen to her haunting song. I work the night shift in the locked unit of our nursing home, where the most severely affected patients reside, those struggling with severe dementia, behavioral issues, and mental illness. This part of the building is an isolated wing on the top floor, and it feels claustrophobic with its long, dark hallways and locked doors. When something unsettling happens, it's enough to send chills down your spine. Here are some of the unsettling experiences I've had. One night, while patrolling the dim corridors, I distinctly heard a man's voice call out, "Hey, come over here." It came from a dead-end hallway, yet there were no men in that area, and all the patients were asleep. No TVs or radios were on. When I recounted this to a colleague, they told me that a patient who had passed away shortly before I started had a habit of calling out for help in exactly the same way. They even described his voice, which matched what I heard perfectly. Another eerie incident involved a patient who had a reputation for being extremely demanding, often bossing around other residents and instructing them harshly. One evening, my husband and I were chatting in the hall outside her former room when we were startled by a loud shush. It sounded just like the patient's commanding hushing of others, yet the hallway was empty and all the patients were asleep. Then there was the case of a patient who moved into a shared room with a woman who had not been kind to her. The new roommate had a habit of reacting aggressively if her food was touched. After the new patient passed away in that shared room, the remaining resident, who had previously been content to sleep alone, became terrified of the room. She would refuse to go to bed and, if she did, would scream, "Don't turn off the lights." She'd spend the night trying to escape, exhibiting a level of fear I had never seen before. One night, she managed to get out of her room, struggling along the hallway without her wheelchair. Her terror was palpable as she fought to escape. I eventually took her to the TV room, where she slept peacefully in a recliner. This behavior lasted for about a month, and only stopped when she was moved to a different room. The prevailing theory was that the deceased roommate was somehow seeking revenge. There's a phenomenon where people near death often start seeing and conversing with deceased loved ones. It's a sign that the end is near. Moreover, call bells occasionally ring in empty rooms, despite being the type that requires pulling down to activate and pushing back up to deactivate, even in locked rooms. But the creepiest thing involves something or someone disturbing my patients at night. I care for a Greek woman who doesn't speak English and often talks loudly in her room. When I check on her, she stops talking and pretends to sleep, only to resume her conversation when I leave. This pattern repeats. She talks until she falls asleep. Then the next resident starts a similar pattern. They're not just mumbling, it's full conversations, with pauses and responses, and they all mention that man. That man was in my room. That man is standing in the corner behind you. That man told me to. Each resident, isolated in their rooms, independently reports the same figure. It's as if someone, or something, is moving from room to room, waking them to talk before moving on. It's a chilling routine that never fails to unsettle me. I often wonder what this man is saying to them. The most unnerving experience occurred just last week. As I walked down the hallway, I felt an intense chill and saw my breath in the frigid air. At the far end of the hallway, I saw a shadowy figure standing motionless. I blinked, and it was gone. I immediately went to check on the patients, their fearful expressions revealing that, whatever was happening, it was deeply unsettling. I used to manage the night shift at Little Coat House Hotel, a sprawling establishment split between a sleek, modern main house built in the late 90s and the ancient old house dating back to the 14th century. The old house was notorious, once listed as the third most haunted building in Britain, and I had heard all the spine-chilling stories. Despite my skepticism, neither a true believer nor a full denier, I was soon to encounter the unsettling reality of these tales. Being a local and the son of a former staff member, I knew the law well. My duties as the nighttime duty manager were straightforward. Handle guest complaints, oversee the transition to the next shift, and ensure every part of the hotel was securely locked up. This included the bar, restaurant, gift shop, and ensuring all fire doors, emergency lighting, and windows were checked and locked. Every single night. The old house was the epicenter of the hotel's paranormal activity. Among its dark corners lay a chapel with a window that defied explanation. No matter how many times I closed and locked it, every time I walked by, the window would be wide open again. This wasn't just my experience. The other duty managers and security staff had witnessed the same phenomenon. It wasn't terrifying yet, just unsettling. Then there was the Jerusalem staircase, named after the wood supposedly sourced from Jerusalem. Local legend spoke of a ghostly dog that would trip people on these stairs. I dismissed it as a myth. People stumble on stairs all the time. But the staircase led to the long gallery, an enormous, dimly lit corridor stretching nearly 100 meters. One night, while performing my routine checks, I heard heavy footsteps echoing from the far end of the gallery. I shone my torch down the length of the room and saw nothing. The footsteps grew louder and faster, escalating into what sounded like a full sprint towards me. My heart raced as I stood frozen, my flashlight shaking. Suddenly, a forceful shove sent me crashing against the wall. Pain exploded through my back, stomach, and chest, as if someone had physically tackled me. The same eerie event had happened to others, leaving me with a chilling sense of dread. The old house had its share of grim history. A particularly gruesome tale involved the lord of the manor, his wife, and a local nurse. Suspecting his wife of infidelity, the lord had the nurse abducted to deliver his child. In a horrific act, He threw the baby into the fireplace and murdered his wife. The nurse escaped, cursing the family with the prophecy that no male heir would survive long after birth. The curse seemed to hold true. None did. The actual bedroom where these horrors took place is hidden. Guests are shown a replica, while the original room lies directly above. Reports of a baby's cries are frequent but unproven. However, one night, while checking the replica room, I saw something that will haunt me forever. Blood appeared to be dripping from the ceiling. My heart pounded as I and the security team rushed upstairs to investigate. There was no trace of blood, no sign of anything out of place. The chapel held another chilling secret. A sculpture of one of the cursed male heirs, a baby wrapped in cloth with closed eyes. One night, as I performed my rounds, I glanced at the statue and was horrified to see its eyes wide open, staring directly at me. I bolted out of that chapel so fast, I'm convinced I broke every speed record.